If recreational marijuana becomes legal, San Diego is ready with a pot tax on the November ballot. The city has such ambitious goals for alternative transit that some call them preposterous. And San Diego Unified is offering preschool for all kids. That's if their families can afford it. I'm Mark Sauer. The KPBS Roundtable starts now. Welcome to our discussion of the week's top stories. I'm Mark Sauer, and joining me at the KPBS Roundtable today, our KPBS Metro reporter Andrew Bowen. Hi, Andrew.
Hi, Mark.
Good to have you here today. Reporter Joshua Emerson Smith of the San Diego Union-Tribune. Hi, Joshua.
Pleasure to be here.
And KPBS education reporter Megan Burks. Hi, Megan.
Hi, Mark.
Glad you're back today. Well, marijuana has long been a lucrative black market business despite the risk of getting busted. Now that recreational use of pot is likely to become legal in November, cities like San Diego are looking to cover their costs for regulation. If Proposition 64 passes and recreational pot is legal, San Diego is ready with Measure N to tax local marijuana sales. So, Andrew, start breaking down for us this proposed tax. So what's the rate and what do they think it might generate?
Well, the first year that recreational marijuana would be legal, which is 2018, it would be taxed at 5%. The year after, it would be going up to 8%. And after that, the city council basically has discretion to move it up or down depending on how the market responds. There's a little bit of a concern that if you tax it too much, that'll just encourage a black market where you can get it cheaper. The IBA, with regards to how much money it's going to bring
independent budget analyst
did a pretty rudimentary analysis based on recreational pot sales in Denver and sort of extrapolated based on population size. So she's figured it could bring in about $22 million in its first year and $35 million once that tax rate goes up. There are a whole lot of variables there, though. So, you know, it depends on how quickly the city actually chooses to issue licensing for recreational pot shops. Whether the city chooses to actually issue those licenses because it doesn't currently allow it, and you know what rules they choose to follow for how pot and where pot can be sold, because the system that we have now only exists for medical dispensaries and it's fairly restrictive. There have only been a little over a dozen that have been allowed under the current city rules. Yeah.
So as you said now, so if assume this passes in November of 2016, it's January of 2018, over a year before cities, as you say, can opt in and license these places and sell them. They don't have to, right?
That's right. Cities do have the discretion to ban recreational marijuana sales altogether. I asked the architect of Measure N, Mark Kersey, whether he had any political will to do that. He said, no, I don't really think that that's the right way to go either. I do oppose legalization, but banning it on a local level I don't think will be all that effective. It's worth noting, though, if a city bans recreational pot sales, it doesn't get, it's ineligible for any state tax money that comes from marijuana sales.
Okay, all right, before we're going to get a bite or two from Kersey, but before we get to that, let's talk about that point you just brought up. There is a state tax that's imposed by the statewide ballot measure, Proposition 64. Explain that.
Several state taxes, actually. So there's a cultivation tax that taxes $9.25 per ounce of dried flower, $2.75 per ounce of dried leaf. And then on sales, there's a 15% excise tax. And that's on top of the regular state sales tax that's already goes on to medical marijuana. All of that money is going to go into a fund in Sacramento. It's going to be sort of distributed to a lot of different things. Among them, just to name a few, there's studying the effects of the law, money to go to sort of things like job placement centers and ways to sort of offset the negative impacts of the drug wars.
Mm-hmm. Some drug education money?
Programs for youth to sort of prevent substance abuse, and also earmarks or grants available to local governments to offset the health and public safety impact.
All right, well, let's get to one of those bites from Councilman Mark Kersey about Measure N here in the city and why we need it.
I don't anticipate we're going to see a whole lot of that money. I mean, maybe we'll get some of it, but I don't think it's going to be very much. And it's just not, I don't think, going to be anywhere close to what we need to actually cover the city's costs.
All right, so why does Councilman Kersey think we're going to get kind of shut out of this state money here that he's referring to.
Well, I asked him what he really meant by that, and he said, you know, the way that it's going to local governments, that Sacramento is basically going to issue grants, and in similar programs in the past, when cities have to compete for this grant money, San Diego has kind of been left in the lurch. So
we just
a lot
at
of
the end of the pipe, or too far south down here, they forget about us.
Who knows? You know, maybe the city needs to just hire better grant writers. But you know, I think he said, you know, LA and the Bay Area get lots of the money, and San Diego's kind of left looking for scraps. He said. So yeah, the how competitive these grants are, though, is actually going to depend on how much money the state takes in, and that, of course, is has a whole lot of variables as well.
Right.
And did he talk about what these big costs are going to be?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the main things he mentioned, I think, are code compliance and law enforcement. So if San Diego has laws on the books regulating how these pot shops can operate, they need to, you know, send in people to make sure that these shops are complying with the law. He also mentioned public health. You know, if there's a sort of novelty effect of, you know, now pot's legal, so let's all get high, then more people might end up smoking marijuana, or the usage actually goes up, then there are costs associated with that.
No, just generally, has that happened elsewhere where pot's been legalized?
You know,
there's been a big spike?
I think that, don't quote me on this, but I think in Colorado they have seen an increase in usage.
And then did it taper off? A novelty
it's unclear now if it's sort of just a novelty effect and it's temporary. You know, in other countries where marijuana is legal, like in the Netherlands, rates of usage are pretty much the same.
Okay. Did the IBA look at that at all, about what the cost would be?
I don't know the answer to that,
yeah. So they kind of have to just guess and base this on what others have done, Megan?
Well, I was going to say, I lived in the Netherlands for a little bit, and none of the locals really smoked it. They thought we were all kind of like crazy because we were so impressed with the novelty of it. But I was going to mention that we're already robustly sending code compliance officers to the medical marijuana dispensaries that open up. There's already quite a bit of infrastructure there that I've done some reporting that shows that sometimes it kind of outweighs code compliance for other like quality of life issues. Do they expect that they're going to need a lot more code compliance officers?
Well, you know, it's a tricky question to ask, and I think a lot of the people who are pro-legalization, but maybe a little skeptical of Measure N, is they see this basically as a grab for money, that the city, you know, is going to have recreational marijuana legal, and so we might as well make money off of it. A lot of people, I think, are also fine with that. You know, if it's going to be legal, we might as well be, you know, using that money for good.
You've got this lucrative market in place. People are used to spending a lot of money in marijuana, so it's there.
Exactly.
We do have another bite from your interview with Councilman Kersey. Let's hear some more from him.
We're really just trying to be proactive on this. We don't want to all of a sudden see all these costs and then have to figure out how we're going to handle them. You know, it's really a situation of trying to be prudent, proactive, getting out ahead of this before it becomes a real problem for the city.
Okay.
So yeah, he was kind of hinting there, like the costs are kind of an unknown. Legal marijuana is still very new. We don't have a whole lot of data. There are just a couple years of data from the states that have legalized
that
it.
That would be Colorado and Washington State.
And a few others. And so, you know, there's really a lot of variables here. We don't know how much it's going to cost. If you know, as we fear, their costs are going to be high, we might as well be prepared for it.
Now, some folks, a lot of folks, may grow their own, and some folks are growing their own now. Are they subject to tax, or can they grow a certain amount, like you can make your own home beer or wine and give it to friends or sell it to friends?
The tax really only applies to commercial operations. So the Prop 64 allows for up to 6 plants in your private residence to grow, and you're also allowed to share that marijuana. So, you know, technically now passing a joint is illegal, but you are allowed to give it sort of as a gift to other people.
Okay.
It just seems like everything I've read, and maybe I'm not educated properly on this, but it seems like it's been like a cash cow for all these places. Like they've raked in tons of tax money.
You're talking about the medical
places that have,
places.
Well, no, I'm talking about states that have legalized recreational. It seems like it's been a huge boon for them, no?
I think there are different opinions about that. Some people certainly agree, yes, that this is a way to make money, and it's a way to, you know, Colorado's using some of their money for schools. Some local governments are using it for homelessness.
Like it's been a net gain.
But yeah, it's been a net gain, and it's also worth noting the state legislative analyst in looking at Prop 64 did find that it will probably be a net gain for the state and local governments. But there is also I think a lot of people in Colorado aren't convinced by that argument. They think there are a lot of costs that are coming with this that we don't know about yet, that we're not necessarily seeing,
like hidden costs.
Yeah, hidden costs, or we don't know what the long-term public health effects are going to be. If smoking rates go up, then we could have increased lung cancer, health problems. I mean, there are a lot of variables here, and I think not everyone really agrees.
Well, we'll see. And as you said, the polls are in favor. It's likely to pass as we see here now in September. All right, we are going to move on then. In the battle against climate change, San Diego leaders have embraced a plan to get people out of cars and onto buses, trolleys, bicycles, and sidewalks in unprecedented numbers. But experts say the city's numbers don't come close to measuring up where the rubber meets the road. Josh, we'll start with those ambitious goals. What's San Diego trying to do overall, and what time frame?
Get people out of their cars and onto sidewalks, bikes, and transit. This is
what
they're trying to do.
To cut the greenhouse gas.
Yeah, within like the next 3 years, 2020, trying to get, and they've done this in these. The way they've calculated is when these transit priority areas, which are within a half mile of major transit stops. And in these areas, they say they'd like to have roughly 22% of everyone who commutes to work using an alternative mode of transportation.
Okay, so
and then by 2035.
That's by 2020, right?
That's by 2020, within the next 3 years. Mm-hmm. And then by 2035, half of everyone within the transit priority areas have to bike, walk, or use transit.
All right, now that's less than 20 years, which is not a huge amount of time in terms of long-range planning and transportation.
So we did, an analysis of this, looking at census data, and the cities that have had the most success over the last 15 years, going back to 2000, showed percentage point increases. Like Berkeley had a 7 percentage point increase, right, over 15 years. Okay. So, but we're looking in these transit priority areas, we're looking for like a 40% percentage point increase.
So
lopsided.
Yeah, lopsided. Maybe preposterous is the word. I mean, is this way out of line with reality?
So the advocates will say, this is not citywide. It's just within these transit priority areas where we should have a better opportunity. There should be more appetite for taking transit in these areas. But still, it's a pretty big difference to make up there. I don't know if transit priority areas are going to do it.
And I think according to your story, you said almost a 250,000 people, 241,000 people.
Of the workforce, yeah.
Yeah, of the workforce in less than 20 years are going to be using transit.
That's what they want, yeah. And, you might ask yourself, well, how did they come up with these numbers, which I did.
My next question, yeah.
And so basically what they did is they tried to get greenhouse gas reduction goals that mirrored the state's goals. Okay. So, and then they said, okay, here's the GHGs that we need to eliminate by these dates, and how are we going to get them? And they said, well, if we can get people out of their cars, that'll get us there. Mm-hmm. But is that viable? I don't know.
Well, let me ask throw this out for the panel now.
Sure.
We all live in Southern California. It's no mistake. I mean, the Beach Boys and other bands have made a fortune writing car songs, and Bruce Springsteen. Yeah. It's in our DNA. It's in our culture. Yeah. We love our automobiles here. I mean, how all of a sudden, just by changing some housing density and community plans, do they really expect folks to suddenly get on the
so the places that have had so the places that have had success have been places like Seattle, and Berkeley, and Arlington County, Virginia, if you can believe that. It built up a lot of density around transit stops. So the question is not so much, can we look like Manhattan already has a lot of people that take public transit, but they didn't make a huge shift overnight. Right. So how do we make this shift within, the next decade or so? And most of the experts say you got to build dense, walkable communities where people feel comfortable walking out their door, hopping on transit, maybe, doing their laundry down the street or going to the grocery store without getting in the car, creating these kinds of neighborhoods. But the thing is, we're already built out for a car culture, so we have to basically do a bunch of urban infill and retrofit, in a sense, the entire city.
Not only kind of change the fabric of the city, but you have to build a lot of the houses, because there's such a shortage that I think a lot of the people who would be more into getting out of their cars are going to be priced out of these neighborhoods where transit-oriented development is
So the question
possible.
is, right, exactly, right? So the question is, how serious is the city about doing this? And this is kind of the second part of the story. And advocates have been calling for the city to measure, to take key measurements about where we are now and where we're going in the future. And when we do our land use plans, are they moving us in the right direction? And the city has said, well, at the end of the year, we're going to have a monitoring report, but right now, we don't really we haven't wanted to do that. Then the Planning Commission weighed in and told the city, no, we want to see these plans for all the land use plans that are called community plan updates. Mm-hmm. We want to see the impact that it's having on transit ridership. Mm-hmm. And so the city kind of hemmed and hawed and said, all right, I guess we'll do it. And now we're waiting to see.
And that happened with the San Ysidro community plan update. The commission basically delayed a vote on whether or not to recommend it. And there are several other community plan updates that are coming up as well in North Park, Uptown, and Golden Hill. And so this could really set a precedent for the rest of all the future decisions of how the city changes its zoning. How much real data-driven analysis are they required to provide under the climate action plan?
And think about the neighborhoods you just mentioned, right? Like, these are all the neighborhoods around downtown. Mm-hmm. If we can't get people out of their cars in those neighborhoods, how are we going to do it in Kearny Mesa or something?
Right, places that are basically built on sprawl.
Or sprawl.
Right. I think one of the tricky things with this, and I think you talked about it in your story, is that the city of San Diego is really the one that's on the hook for enforcing and implementing the climate action plan. But a huge part of meeting those goals has to do with public transit, and public transit is not in the hands of the city of San Diego. It's in the planning is in the hands of Sandag. And operations are in the hands of MTS. And so I think there's a sense among a lot of environmental advocates and advocates for transit that the city needs to really take its role in those organizations a lot more seriously, take much more of an interest in ensuring that the city meets those goals, because when the authority for a lot of these decisions rests with another agency, the city is ultimately going to be the one to pay the price.
And let's be clear, the city sits on Sandag. They have a powerful role on the San Diego Association of Governments, and the same with the Metropolitan Transit System, right? Yeah. They could be pressing to get the kinds of changes that are needed to get the amount of transit in the city, but we haven't really seen that yet. I think we can say that objectively. We haven't seen a significant amount of pressure to kind of boost the transit that's going into the city to meet these goals.
And ultimately, it's all our individual decisions. This has to gin up among us to say, I'm going to...
There's a cultural shift that needs to happen as well.
And I wonder, really, if the city ultimately gets sued and it doesn't, because it's not meeting the goals, I wonder how serious the city is going to have to get. Are we going to see a car tax? Are we going to see an increase in the gas tax?
So this is an interesting point, because the city says we're actually not on the hook for the transit goals. We're only on the hook for the greenhouse gas reductions. Yeah. So, and there's disagreement about that, and that might be something that's taken to the courts. So we'll have to see how that plays out.
I mean, realistically, we're still in an era of cheap gas. Maybe not so cheap in California, but it's still cheap, and it looks like the long-term trend, as far as we can see, is down. Oil prices are kind of depressed worldwide, and use is down. Without financial incentives, do you really expect a lot of this many people to get out of their cars?
No.
Do the inconvenience of public transit?
No, I think that ultimately it might come down to the financials. Like people, I don't think you can assume that people are just going to do the right thing because, it's in the interest of the entire world. People generally, economics tells us, they think in their own self-interest. Sure. And, probably most of us do.
Capitalism is based on that.
And that's the point of redesigning these neighborhoods, to make it something that people actually want to do, not that they feel guilty about doing, but that they say, I don't want to drive my car 5 blocks to go to the grocery store or something.
Because it's easier for me to walk.
Because it's easier to walk, yeah, exactly, and more enjoyable.
Well, we'll certainly see as we go forward here. I know we'll have a lot more on this before it's all over. We're going to move on. San Diego schools have offered preschool programs free to low-income families, but with many slots unfilled in recent years, San Diego Unified this week announced plans to open preschool to all families, providing they're willing to pay. Megas, tell us about the new pre-K. What's the difference here? What changes now?
So it was previously the state-run pre-K or state-subsidized pre-K program for just income-qualified families. Now the school district is calling it pre-K for all, meaning that any family can enroll their child into their preschool programs. It's not really pre-K for all in the sense that I think a lot of people are inclined to first think, oh, right, it's like free now. You have to pay a fee if you're not income qualified.
And it was tough to qualify before, right? I mean, you really had to be kind of a struggling family.
Right, yeah. The formula used to set that income threshold was pretty outdated from 2007, I believe, and it was just under $47,000 for a family of 4.
Okay, so low income, certainly, as we said.
Yeah, and it's a really hard threshold. So if you get a 10-cent raise, if you're making a penny over, you're out of luck.
Oh, so they don't prorate it at all. If you're making $5,000 over, then you only pay based on your overage? No.
Right.
And in the new system, isn't that way either? I mean, you're going to pay the full freight even if you only make $50,000 or $55,000.
Right, yeah. So it's definitely adding pre-K slots to the region, but it's not really fixing that affordability problem for those people in those low to middle income slots. So if you're making $50,000, like you said, you're probably still not going to be able to afford what the district is charging.
Well, let's talk about those costs a little bit. I don't want to bog everyone down with a bunch of numbers, but kind of give us the ballparks on how expensive it would be if you want to have this
So it depends on a couple of things. It depends if you want a half day or a full day. If it's a half day, it's about $5,400 a year. Full day, $6,700 to about $12,000 a year, depending on if you're at 6 to 8 hours, depending on if you're 10 months, 12 months, and also depending on your location. So if you're going to a preschool in a lower income area, the cost is going to be a little bit lower.
And it's not limited to just San Diego Unified families either, right? Other kids from other districts.
It doesn't matter if you live within the district boundaries. One of the examples the district gave is that if you live in East County but you work in downtown, you can drop your kid off at one of the schools offering this preschool on your way to work.
All right, Joshua, you've got a couple of kids. You look at this problem all the time with working couples.
Yeah, I have 2 young boys, and when I saw this, I said, wow, that's actually a really great thing. It's hard to find childcare, preschool, and those seem like reasonable prices, especially compared to what's out there right now. What motivated this? What was the key motivations? It seems like a pretty progressive policy.
Well, I think that the school district recognized the benefits of preschool. It increases graduation rates. It increases...
About time, right? We've known those for quite a while.
Yeah. In fact, the latest study is actually just a renewal of a study that's been going on since the 70s.
And the benefits are pretty clear?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. About 20 percentage points higher for graduation rates. And even your ability to deal with stress is supposed to be better into your adulthood if you went to preschool.
Now, I would assume that they're not all equal, though. You probably still have to do your homework and see what preschool you want to go to, what school is offering what services, right? Certain amount of shopping the parents have to do.
There's kind of a patchwork where there's faith-based preschools, there's more formal school-based preschools, and then there's in-home preschools. And typically in-home preschools a little bit less kind of academic rigor.
Right.
So it depends.
Now San Diego Unified is the big dog. That's the big school district around. Do other districts offer pre-K? And as you said earlier, of course, kids from other districts now can come into San Diego.
Yeah, districts have been doing this throughout the country. Poway Unified is one that I know of locally that's already doing it.
Okay, so that's available there. Now, how many folks, how many kids were enrolled in the way it was with the income-based strategy, and how many are they maybe expecting as they expand this now?
So the past couple of years, they've had just under 3,000 spots. A couple of school years ago, they actually had a lot of those slots open. I haven't seen the numbers for this recent one they had, but a couple of school years, it was 700 slots open. This year, they're taking, again, about 3,000, adding about 400 openings. So they're expecting to serve about 3,400 kids total. That includes the income qualified as well as the fee-based.
Okay. And do we know how many in San Diego County area, how many kids now go to preschool and take advantage of this?
The best estimate is about half.
Well, about half. So I mean, it's a huge deal. And again, I imagine this breaks down through income, though. The parents that have more means, more resources, are probably able to, one way or another, find preschool for their kids.
Right. It's the press release for this big announcement called it a groundbreaking announcement for education, and it's definitely a good announcement. But again, it's just not solving that problem for people in the middle who really can't afford $1,000 a month.
Have you gotten some response to your story in that regard? Are you hearing from some of those parents, or are the school leaders hearing from those parents?
What I've heard, I spoke with one parent, and she said that her husband immediately emailed her the link because they saw Preschool for All and they thought it was free pre-K. Right. So I think that the district maybe, I think that they should be excited that they're taking this step like they are, but I don't know, I think it's not as big of a step as people thought it was out of the gate.
And they're hoping that the folks who are now paying fees, that will cover the cost of this expanded program, right?
Right. We couldn't get any numbers from them on whether or not the district will have to eat any of the costs, but they did say that to expand and add more seats, it would be based on the revenue from these new fee.
All right, well, we're going to have to leave it there, but we'll be looking for more reporting as it goes and see how this program works out in the coming time. Well, that does wrap up another week of stories at the KPBS Roundtable. I'd like to thank my guests, Andrew Bowen of KPBS News, Joshua Emerson Smith of the San Diego Union Tribune, and Megan Burks, also of KPBS. A reminder, all the stories we discussed today are available on our website, kpbs.org. I'm Mark Sauer. Thanks for joining us today on the Roundtable.